AI agents are everywhere, automating tasks and making decisions at machine speed. But agents make mistakes. Just one rogue agent can do big damage before you even notice. Rubrik Agent Cloud is the only platform that helps you monitor agents, set guardrails, and rewind mistakes, so you can unleash agents, not risk. Accelerate your AI transformation at Rubrik.com. That's RUBRIK.com.
I'm Scott Hanson, host of NFL Red Zone. Lowe's knows Sundays are for football. That's why we're here to help you get your next DIY project done, even when the clock isn't on your side. Whether that's a new Filtrete filter or Bosch and Cobalt power tools, Lowe's has everything you need to feel like the MVP of DIY. So get it done and earn your Sunday. Shop now, in-store and online. Lowe's, official partner of the NFL.
Welcome to Radical Personal Finance, a show dedicated to providing you with the knowledge, skills, insight, and encouragement you need to live a rich and meaningful life now while building a plan for financial freedom in 10 years or less. My name is Joshua Sheets. I'm your host. And indeed, I did not lie in the title that I presented this podcast to you with. I have changed everything. I have reset everything in my life. And in this podcast and in the next few podcasts, I want to share with you a little bit of what I have done because I think it will be helpful, and I'll share some ideas that I think will be helpful to you. I, in many ways, have considered myself to be the expensive guinea pig where I have a bunch of crazy ideas and I go out and test those ideas, and then I come back and report to you on the results of my tests of those ideas. And hopefully I can save you a few years or a few decades, and hopefully I can save you a few shekels or a few million. And over time, this hopefully is of service to you. But it is true. I have changed and reset everything in my life. Now, some of these things I have shared with you recently. There haven't been many podcasts over the last few weeks. You'll understand why. But I've changed where I live. I've changed countries. I've changed houses. I haven't changed wives. I haven't changed children. I have changed businesses. I have purchased a business. I am starting another one that is not related to radical personal finance, and I'm changing a lot of things. And so I want to share those things with you, and I want to do it in a way that I think will help you to garner some lessons, some useful lessons. And I'll share these things openly, honestly, as from the very beginning, while it's quite humbling and frankly, just flat out embarrassing a lot of times to share my mistakes. I made a commitment to you publicly in the first episode or a couple of episodes that I may not be the smartest guy out there. I probably do a lot of dumb stuff, but I'll at least be honest. And to the best of my ability, I have maintained that commitment. Again, many times it's been very humbling. And even in this series of podcasts that I'm going to do this week, I'm going to share with you some of those things. And I don't really want to because I'd like to be cooler than I am and be smarter than I am. But in reality, hey, this is who I am. And it's easier to go through life being honest because then you get the help that you need. So I have reset everything. And I want to share with you about those resets in detail. However, I want to begin by telling you how I have reset my philosophy. The reset that I have engaged in my life flows directly from my philosophy. I would like someday to be a philosopher. I don't know if I'll ever achieve it. If I could do anything and go back and change my early years of life, I would have taken a keener interest in philosophy. I'd probably have gotten a degree in philosophy instead of business. As it is, I'm no philosopher. I'm not even an amateur philosopher. I don't qualify in any way as a philosopher, but I understand the impact of our personal philosophy. And as I am getting older, what I now see is how consistently we live in accordance with our philosophy. I can see that in my life, most of the decisions that I have made are largely predictable to anybody who is older than me and who knows me well. Because I open my mouth and I talk about what I think. Anybody with ears to hear can figure out what my philosophy is based upon what I think, and then you can pretty well predict what I'm going to do. And I can do this with other people now. In fact, I do this with other people. I hear what people say, and then I kind of think, here's where I think this person's going to go. And then you check in with them 5 years later, and yep, they're about where you thought they would be. And That's pretty interesting to me. And what it means is we need to be really, really careful about the philosophy that we form. But if we come back to what is before philosophy, then it comes down to influence. And what I have realized is that we need to be so careful about our influences because the people that we allow to influence us are going to provide us with the ideas that will form our philosophy. And then that philosophy will give us the ideas which will eventually result in actions. And then as we take those actions, our lives will change, sometimes for the good and sometimes for the bad. Ideas have consequence. Ideas have consequences. If we went even before ideas, we could say influences lead to ideas, and those ideas lead to consequences. So I want to share with you how I have reset my philosophy, because if you understand the changes in my thinking, based on my experience and based upon all the experiments that I've been running for now, a long time, but a decade and coming up on close to more than a decade publicly here with you on Radical Personal Finance, then I think you'll understand where I'm going and why I'm going there. Now, for those of you who've been with me on this almost 12-year journey, more than 12-year journey, you won't need this refresher I'm about to give. But I do have new listeners, and I want to give a succinct summary of the ideas that have led me to where I am today, so that I can then tell you which of those ideas I continue to accept and which of those ideas I now reject. Let's start with a philosophy about money. First and foremost, when I was a boy, I was not given or taught any particular comprehensive philosophy with regard to money. I was not told this is all the things you should do. I wasn't given a big vision with money. I was given a general Christian outlook on money. And as Christians, one of the things that is basic to Christian ideas related to money is that there are many warnings about money. For example, Jesus warned that the love of money is the root of all evil. There are many warnings against things like debt. There are warnings against having too much and having too little. And so I was taught those kinds of things. And I was taught a very good, basic, practical approach to handling money by my father and my mother. My father and my mother are prudent people. My father is an engineer. He was totally broke when he was younger, had to work hard to make more money. And so he developed some basic skills of how to do that. And he's just a good common sense guy. And he was able to articulate those things to me. I learned a lot of lessons when I was younger. I was taught responsibility by contributing to the family wheel. I was taught to pay attention to what I'm spending. I was discouraged from going into debt. But there wasn't, my dad didn't write a 500-page book and tell me, here's the philosophy that you should have. And I probably would have rejected it if he had. So there's that. Some of the earliest things, in addition to my parents' teaching, that I can identify as resources, primarily related to basic, conventional personal finance that was popular at the time. I think one of the first financial books that I remember reading was David Bach's book, Automatic Millionaire. What happened is I got into personal development and started listening to some personal development stuff that a guy suggested I listen to. And I think he gave me some recordings. I started listening to it. And one of the personal development gurus said, if you want to do well in life, you probably should study money. So I went to the library and I got a book got some books on money and started to read them. And so I remember reading David Bach's The Automatic Millionaire. If my memory is correct, I read the Gone Fishing portfolio or like the Lazy Man's portfolio or something like that. It was the Bogleheads were starting to, had been doing it for a while. So I read a book like that. I remember reading several kind of similar books that were just basic mainstream conventional finance. And I was super motivated by the idea that, hey, if I just start early enough, then save a little bit of money, then I'll probably be rich when I'm older. And I discovered that basically everybody in America could become rich if they just started saving some money and if they just started doing some smart stuff. And I was really grateful for those lessons. And so I tried to start doing smart things. I remember opening my Roth IRA on my 18th birthday and, trying to do a couple of smart things. Then I went to some friends of mine had tickets to, I think it was called a Get Motivated seminar. And if I recall correctly. And so I went to this Get Motivated seminar in Miami, and these were a big deal at the time. And it was really fun, really enjoyed the seminar. And that was some of my early exposure to that world. And I believe I bought the promotion at the seminar to a Russ Whitney real estate seminar. Russ Whitney was one of the real estate gurus back in those days. And I went to his seminar with a friend of mine, and I got totally motivated by, let's invest in real estate and get super rich with real estate. I signed up for some of his stuff, and this is while I was in college. And then along the way, that led to other things. I think I read, who was the guy? The Millionaire Mind. T. Harv Eker was really big at the time. And so I went I read his book called The Millionaire Mind, and I went to the T. Harv Eker Millionaire Mind seminar. I really enjoyed those things, and it started to expand my thinking. But I was still going to college, and I didn't have a lot of money. I was working, making a little bit of money, and I was really broke through college, paying my way through. I avoided some of the big mistakes. I didn't lose a bunch of money, but I didn't have very much money. And I was going into debt for student loans because I decided I was working too hard and I really should, enjoy my college experience. I started borrowing money on student loans. Then after I studied abroad, I came back to the United States, dropped out of school, and my brother gave me a copy of Dave Ramsey's book, The Total Money Makeover, because he had been listening to Dave Ramsey on the radio and enjoyed it. So he bought me a copy of The Total Money Makeover. And Total Money Makeover totally changed my life because I thought, man, this is really smart. If I didn't have any debt, how much money would I have? This would be really great. So I'm going to get out of debt. And I worked really hard and I got out of debt. 2 weeks before I graduated, I paid off my student loans. And I was totally hardcore in on the Total Money Makeover philosophy, the Dave Ramsey philosophy of financial management. I bought all the Financial Peace CDs or DVDs, and I led a Financial Peace seminar with a bunch of my friends. And I was really into that. After college, I worked in the corporate world. And then things were going fine until I got laid off. And I was getting annoyed by how little money I was making. And I was doing okay, but I had what at the time seemed like big goals, and I couldn't see any pathway to them. And so that's when I started to focus on, well, you know what? If I could just fix how I earned my money, then I could do better. And so I really wanted to not be paid an hourly wage. I wanted to be paid for results, not for time. It drove me nuts to have to show up at a certain time every day and have to do that every day. I wanted to be paid for results, for performance, not for time. I wanted to build equity. I didn't want to just have one-time compensation. I wanted to build equity. I wanted to have money coming in that wasn't for what I'm doing today. And so after I got laid off, my former boss suggested that I go and look at the financial services industry. So after looking around for a few months, I was like, yeah, I could do this. I could learn to sell. So I went and started selling life insurance for a big life insurance company. And then I continued on with financial planning, became a certified financial planner and yada, yada, a bunch of other stuff. And then when I was there, I thought, man, this is my ticket to basically like making a lot of money without having to run a business. And I was doing fine. Except I continued to listen to talk radio, and especially financial talk radio. And at the time, I was driving a lot, so I listened to probably 30 to 40 hours of audio per week on 2 to 3x speed. So I consumed 60 to 80 or more hours of audio per week. So I learned a lot. And I got frustrated because I couldn't turn my ideas into solutions. I would listen to a Dan Kennedy seminar. He would talk about all these cool marketing things, but I couldn't figure out how in the financial planning business to apply that. And so I listened to all these sales seminars, and it was going okay, but it wasn't getting there. And then one day in 2013, I sat down and I thought, because I'd gotten annoyed with people who weren't. I was learning more about financial planning, learned about all these exotic things that I didn't know about, and so I listened to Dave Ramsey hammer on whole life insurance, but I had never heard him talk about bank-owned life insurance or corporate-owned life insurance. And here I was learning about Boley and Coley, and I was like, wait a second, why, if Dave Ramsey is just so sure that nobody should ever own a whole life insurance policy, why has he never talked about Boley and Coley? And so those kind of things piqued my interest. And I started to see all these ideas. And one more big influence, forgive me, this is an important one that I missed, is that I started to get interested in the early retirement space and in basically kind of the radical living space. I read The 4-Hour Workweek when it was first published. I was hanging out in Barnes & Noble. I used to go there a couple times a week and just hang out for a few hours and read books. And so I remember I picked up 4-Hour Workweek right off the shelf and read that. And when I was in college, right when it came out, and that really influenced me. And then I read The Early Retirement Extreme by Jacob Lund Fisker, and that really influenced me. And I followed his blog. I had found his blog online because I was super bored of my salary job. So I had my feed reader with hundreds of blog feeds. And this was really at I don't want to say the heyday, but it was where Early Retirement Extreme was a big blog, and JD at Get Rich Slowly, and there were a bunch of, I forget Trent and what his blog was, but I subscribed to hundreds of blogs. I'd listen to I read all these blogs and all these kind of new and innovative ideas, and I thought, this stuff is really great. Like, we should be doing more of this. And then that led to the early retirement space. And so I got into the early retirement blog space, and I also got into reading a bunch of the early retirement books that were out there. And what most of those books focused on was the extreme savings solution. And I couldn't figure out very well how to do great extreme savings because I went ahead and got married and yada, yada. But I was so motivated by that. I was like, this is my ticket. If I just save 75% of my income, everything is going to be great. And this is absolutely my ticket. I'll be financially independent by the time I'm 30. So I didn't really love the financial planning business, primarily because I found most of it boring. And by the way, this is important. I'm not criticizing the industry, but I have since learned that there's always going to be boredom if you're going to build wealth. Like, basically, it's going to either be hard or it's going to be boring. You don't get away from hard or boring. But I was pretty bored with it. And that boredom with it meant that I did okay, but I was never a top performer because I was more interested in learning about something new that I didn't know about than I was of just, hitting the phone and calling more people and doing the same thing and giving the same speech and yada, yada, yada. So then one day in 2013, I sat down and I pulled out my voice recorder and I recorded what is still episode 1 of Radical Personal Finance. And I found that I really enjoyed it. And I thought, you know what, for me, doing something like Radical Personal Finance would be ideal because I don't have to be bored anymore. I could basically, the idea of getting paid to be able to investigate and think about anything I was interested in and go wandering off down the internet for several hours at a time, consume a whole bunch of stuff, think about it for a few days, and then talk about it. To me, that's a dream job. It still is. I still love it. I still think about that. That's basically all I do is I go wandering down some pathway. I learn everything I can about something I'm interested in. Sometimes I do shows on it. Much of the time I don't. But then it pops out, a year later, 2 years later, and I've been thinking about it since then, and it's super fun. So I thought this would be amazing. And then all of these ideas that I had came back in. I had been following the minimalist blogs. I was like, oh, this I could do this, and I had followed the lifestyle blogs and all these kinds of influences that were there for me. And so in 2013, I recorded Radical Personal Finance, first 10 episodes, and I thought this is going to be cool. And then when I went to my compliance officer and I submitted it as an outside business activity, she called me and said, Joshua, get that thing off the internet or you're done here. And I didn't know what to do. I think my wife was pregnant at the time with our first baby. I had barely made it in the business. I was going okay now. So I was like, I can't risk everything. So it took me 6 months to decide whether I was going to leave, because the only way I could see it was to leave and get rid of all my licenses. So it wasn't the only way, but that was one way. So it took me 6 months to decide to do it, and then another 6 months to figure out how to afford to do it because I had no business model, had no plan, which, by the way, I'll tell you more about the business models when I get to the episode in this series on Radical Personal Finance. I had no plan, but I finally figured it out. So then in 2014, I left my job and started Radical Personal Finance. And you've been hearing me most of the time since then, fairly consistently. And over the years, I have chased down most of those ideas to their extreme. So it wasn't really intentional. What I mean is I didn't set out and say, well, I'm going to do this idea, but those ideas were there. And so naturally, I just over time, when you saw an opportunity, I went for it. And so my first idea was that of a lifestyle business rather than kind of a big business. I think it was a real business. And I said, you know what? I'm going to build a lifestyle business. My goal was, man, if I could just make $100,000 a year from a laptop. I don't want any employees. I don't want any employees. I don't want anything to do. I just want me and my laptop, $100,000 a year. That would be great. And I did it. I think it took me, I don't recall, but like 3 years, and I did it. And I was like, awesome. That was great. Only it turns out it wasn't as great as I thought it was because, all right, well, I'm Mr. Independent. I can do what I want, but I still need to do things. And let me not jump the gun. I'll get to that later. But I thought about a lifestyle business. And so I achieved that goal. And it sounded like a dream. And I did it. And then, well, it's not perfect. I remember traveling. Travel was not a big thing for me, meaning that I had traveled a bit when I was younger. But I think it gets overstated. Like I think some people have an inaccurate perception that somehow I was a big traveler. Basically, I just said yes to like a half dozen trips and those half dozen trips changed me in a significant way. And they were relatively tame things. I remember how scared I was when I did some of them. I remember when I graduated from college and I went off and quit my job and loaded up my car and my little $2,000 car with I think 293,000 miles on it when I left on my trip and drove off across the United States for a couple of months and learned a lot, had a great experience. I remember a different time I got on an airplane and went to Colombia. I didn't have very much money, but I went to Colombia and I was super scared to go to Colombia because it's Colombia, right? It's a scary place, but I had a great time. And so I learned a little bit. So anyway, but I didn't travel a lot. I didn't go on the road for years at a time. But I read in years prior, I had read about these travel bloggers who would go on the road for years at a time. So that'd be fun sometime. So then that eventually led after I was stabilized the business and we'd had some children and I was like, let's go do the travel thing. So we went and did the RV thing because I had gotten into the RV thing, right? Because this would be an amazing way to live. And to this day, if I were single, I would probably be one of those bums down at the local park, living in the back of my pickup truck camper, reading philosophy or something. Like that's probably who I would be. Like that's kind of who I am. I just have more responsibility on me, and so out of love for my wife and children, and out of a little bit of common sense, I'm not doing that. But I loved that. I enjoyed that. And so that was the exciting thing of here I am with my wife and my children, and we got rid of all our stuff and we're kind of minimalist. And then I realized, well, it doesn't work quite as well as it should, right? So I've told you the stories. And I tried to do it I did it on the cheap. Excuse me. I didn't try to do it on the cheap. I did it on the cheap. And so I like to prove that things can be done, right? Because I've had this chip on my shoulder to basically prove, kind of, I guess, flows from the Mr. Money Mustache philosophy, to basically prove, no, you don't actually have to make a lot of money to live well. I guess probably before a precursor was not Mr. Money Mustache, but it was very much the Tim Ferriss philosophy. You know, the idea that nobody wants to be a millionaire. They just want to live like a millionaire. That was the idea that I learned from 4 Hour Workweek. So you learn about hacking things, and I was always pretty smart, and you figure out the hacks. And you figure out if I just go and get a credit card, then I can travel first class and do the travel hacking thing. Or, man, if I could just live like a millionaire and have this automatic income coming in, I don't need to be a millionaire. And I was always drawn towards the fast and the easy and the get it now. Right? Because who's not? Who among us doesn't want that? Who among us doesn't want to go and go on the 30-day diet and lose 30 pounds? We all want the fast and easy. We glorify that. And especially Americans, we do that. Like, it's just part of our DNA. We want fast and easy and now. And so I read Lifehacker all the time and all this hacking everything. And so that really, those influences were strong on me in that direction. So I did it, right? And then when I left the United States, I never had a grand plan to leave the United States. When we went on the RV plan, I had no plans to leave the United States. I was kind of looking around the country thinking there might be somewhere else that I might like to live other than Florida, but I couldn't really find anything. And then we were having this baby and I was reading about the international stuff. And I thought, man, this is really good. And I've shared before, I had this crisis of conscience related to in 2015 when Senator Sanders and Senator Clinton were the leading Democratic candidates for president. They said that they were going to, if elected, that they were going to end the Hyde Amendment. And I just thought, man, how could I pay money that would be used to pay for abortion? Like that, I can't do that. And so that was kind of part of it. And along the years, back to philosophy, political philosophy, I'd really engaged with libertarianism, right? Because what young man doesn't, right? So I'd engaged with libertarianism and it just seemed so great. And I was disgusted by Republicans and didn't like Democrats. And so I was libertarian was kind of the cool thing to do, right? Because then nobody can pigeonhole you. They can't, if you say you're a libertarian, you're just kind of a kook. And so you can get along with everybody. You can say, well, I think we should all smoke weed and I think we should all, I don't know what you say to Republicans, whatever. But the libertarian thing. So I'm reading like how I found freedom in an unfree world. And that's what led me, I think, to W.G. Hill and reading PT. And so I had this like libertarian philosophy thing that came along. And when I read PT by W.G. Hill, I just thought, this is the ultimate expression of libertarianism. I read all about flag theory and early PT theory. And I thought, man, there's nothing better than this. This is actually full freedom. And so it wasn't an accident that a number of years later, it wasn't an accident that I was learning about birth tourism along the way, but it just seemed like because I was following those ideas, those interests down, and it's like, well, here we are, we're in an RV, we're having our fourth baby, and we don't have a house, and might as well do it. So, honey, you want to do it? And she said, sure. So we hopped on an airplane and went abroad. And then that opened up the international stuff. And I'd been into the international stuff before. I got into the Agora publishing world. And so I read International Living and I read all the books about how you can just have an amazing life if you go abroad and you can sit on the beach for $300 a month and have a great life. And of course, that always appealed to me, right? Because I want to sit on the beach for $300 a month. I don't want to be the chub, the chump who has to earn and buy a $2 million house on the beach. I want to be the smart guy who goes abroad and has this really great lifestyle abroad where everything is cheap and he gets a great deal for everything. I want to be the smart guy. And along the way, it's kind of working out. I'm not stupid. I've always been able to kind of make it go, but along the way, it's like always going, but not quite. Like it's never quite working as well as you think. It's never quite the dream. When I left the financial services business and decided to go do the online thing, my plan was to make $10 million a year. Now, I recognize that I said I wanted to make $100,000 a year, but who among us doesn't? You start an online business. The goal is, hey, I'm going to have $10 million a year roll in. It's going to be hunky-dory. Everything's going to be great. Except it never quite worked the way it was supposed to, right? And then when you go abroad, the idea is, well, everything's going to be just great because I've got so much money and I have this wonderful standard of living that I'm going to be able to live like a king. And it kind of works. Except it's just not as great as you think. And there's all these frustrations. And you look around and you're like, it'd be nice to have a hot water heater that was 3 times the size of this one. But hot water heaters are really expensive and, they're not, and it'd be nice to have a functional library system and it'd be nice to have this and nice to have that. And I've embraced it and I've enjoyed all that I have done. I've enjoyed a lot of it, but it's frustrating. And let me give you the kind of the ultimate pinnacle experience, right? Twice in the last 5 years. Twice, I've done the full-on hardcore homeless thing where we had nothing. We had got rid of everything except one small storage locker of stuff, no furniture. At one point, I'd gone from 5 cars down to no cars, and I like living car-free. I enjoyed that. But I had no cars, and I had gotten rid of everything, and we're on the road for this multi-month plan. My plan, this was in 2021, and my plan was to go spend 6 months in Europe and 6 months in Asia. And I shared that with you, and I had a clear plan. Except when I got to Europe, 2 things happened. The first one, which was less of a big deal, was that I thought COVID was done, but Europe didn't think COVID was done, and Asia didn't think COVID was done. And so it was wound up being really annoying, as that we were in France for a month. And I thought, we'll go work on our French. It'll be great. We'll go to France. We'll do immersion. It'll be just wonderful. And so we go to France, and I was able to get into 2 restaurants because we didn't have the barcode that you had the pass sanitaire. So we didn't have the barcode, so we couldn't get into the restaurants, and we got turned away from everywhere. So here we are on Sunday after church, literally going to try the drive-through at McDonald's or some version of a fast food restaurant because we didn't have the papers to be able to go into the restaurants. And so that kind of was annoying. But that was the smaller thing. The bigger thing was just we weren't having a great time. And I had set it all up, right? I had bought a car. I was going to drive from we started in Portugal, and I was going to drive to Istanbul. I'd never been to Turkey, and I really wanted to go to Turkey because I was super interested in what's happening there. And so I bought a car, and we're going to set off, but it wasn't fun. It wasn't fun. And I've shared that with you, right? It was stressful, and I was not enjoying it, and my wife wasn't enjoying it. And that was annoying because you're like, here we are living the dream. Like, this should be the dream, and yet it's not fun. And I try to figure out, why is it not fun? And in that scenario, it wasn't fun due to decision fatigue. And I mean, I had to make so many decisions every day. It was just like, what on earth? And I've shared that, but it's a short story. Let me articulate it for you. We were in Spain, and I think Valencia, something like that. And we were visiting some friends. And what I discovered is we went out and we were having kebabs on the street of, I forgot the name of the town. I could find it. It doesn't matter. And we're sitting there, and I look at my wife. I was like, I'm not having fun. She's like, I'm not. I think she said, I'm not either. Like, but what I realized was I was so tired of making decisions. And that whole travel thing is nothing but never-ending decisions. And especially when you do it with children, every decision is big. So I would wake up in the morning, and I'm an early riser. First thing I do is I have the decision. Do I sit in my room where it's dark and, use my phone or something like that so that my wife and children can keep sleeping and hopefully get a little more sleep? Or do I walk out of the room to a central place, go to the lobby, have a cup of coffee where I can really enjoy my morning and work there, have a cup of coffee and get 30 minutes in before everyone else wakes up? But literally, I'm worried about the click of the door because the door is going to click. Then one of the children is going to wake up. That's going to wake up my wife, and then she can't sleep and they can't sleep, and then everyone's up. All right, so that's the first decision. Where do I go? Do I stay in the room or do I leave the room? Then what do we do for breakfast? Well, do we go to the hotel because they have breakfast or they don't have breakfast? If they have breakfast, is it a good breakfast? Or do we go out to a restaurant? Or do we try to, be frugal and, drink milk and muesli in the room or something like that? And then what are we going to do today? Well, where am I going to work? And I need to get a couple hours of work in, right? Because I may have I don't have a 4-hour work week, but I got a 14-hour work week. So I need to get a couple hours in. So when am I going to do that? Am I going to do that this morning? Well, then what's my wife going to do? Is she going to sit in a hotel room, or is she going to take a bunch of children to the beach? And then what about lunch? And every moment of every day, you have to make fresh decisions. And it's exhausting because all the decisions are big. It's not, okay, let's go out to lunch and it's going to cost $15. No, we're going to go out to lunch and it's going to cost $150. And then where are we going to stay tomorrow? And so I'm always managing the logistics, and it's super tiring. And so when I realized that, then the next thing I did was I booked a house for a month, and that was great, right? But then where are we going to go after that? And so the decisions just go build and build and build. And then even things like, hey, let's go to France and let's spend a month in France. The problem is you spend so much time dealing with your logistics that I learned less French in France than I did outside of France. Because when I'm home and I've got the house working and everything's going smoothly, then everything can tick along, and I can get up in the morning and I can put in a good hour, 2 hours of language study early in the morning. But when I'm in France, I got to figure out where's the grocery store. And so, yeah, I can have a short conversation with the people at the grocery store, but I don't have any way to engage with the people. And then once again, traveling with a bunch of children, it's okay, we can go to the park. And yes, children do open up opportunities to talk to people at the park. But then am I just going to run off to a local cafe to talk to some stranger? Well, when you're 20 years old, you can do that. And you just go and spend all afternoon chatting up in the cafe. But I've got responsibilities. And so that doesn't work. So all these things that like I dreamed, oh, this would be amazing. This is the dream. Well, you do it. And I've done them all. You're like, okay, I could see that there were some good things, but it all depends on how I spin it. If I spin it positively and I just put the pictures on Instagram of here we are in France, look at our beautiful house and blah, blah, blah. All right, then I can make everyone jealous and they'll think about how bad their pitiful life is and want to be me. But in reality, if I'm not putting the pictures on Instagram, in reality, it's just kind of a place. It's just kind of life. And it's just kind of hard. And there's some cool peak experiences. And there's some difficult experiences. And I embrace the difficulty. But it's not all the dream, is the point. And now we get to the passage of the years. Because all of this stuff comes with a cost. And if you're not on the conventional path and you're on the radical path, the costs start to build. So the cost to my business. It has cost me a huge amount of money to have bad infrastructure. I've shared that with you. But it's cost me a huge amount of money. It's cost me a huge amount of money to not have an office to go to. It's cost me a huge amount of money to be off on my own, to not be competing with other people. And that's one of the reasons people kind of continue down this path is you wind up with a certain philosophy, then you wind up basically cut out of and frozen out of where your peers are. If you live in the conventional track and you have a good resume and you have a good network and you build good relationships, then you have lots of connections and you can keep on going. But if you take a decade off and you're outside of that track, you don't have those basic things that other people have. And I remember 4 or 5 years ago, I got scared. It's like, man, I think I'm okay. I think there's some people on the internet that would help me if I needed help. Like, I think this could work out, but man, my network's growing stale. I'm all by myself. What am I going to do? What is my family going to do if I fail? And that was a new concept because I never before had worried about failure. And then I started to notice the costs of independence. And I started to recognize, you know what? I'm lonely. And when I say I'm lonely, it's not the way I experienced loneliness when I was younger. I remember that emotional loneliness. So it was one time I took a trip. I think I went to Costa Rica and I went by myself for a week and just traveled by myself. I'd never traveled by myself and I decided I was going to go and do that. So I went to Costa Rica and I bummed around Costa Rica for a week. And I remember sitting in a cafe, eating or something. And I was so lonely. I just desperately did not want to be there. And I wanted to do it because I wanted to test out the travel alone thing. It's a lot easier to travel by yourself than it is to get a bunch of people together. And I wanted to test it. But I was like, I don't get why anybody travels alone. This sucks. I don't want to do this anymore. So I remember that sense of loneliness. But I haven't, when I'm talking about loneliness, I don't have that sense. But that's not what I mean. I don't mean that like, oh, I'm emotionally lonely. I'm not emotionally lonely. I have a wife, I have children, I have friends. But what happened is I wound up being very lonely in terms of like feeling like I was going to work on something that mattered. And I realized that I had spent years trying to take the easy pathway so that everything in life would be easy. And I realized that the fundamental error in my thinking was believing that somehow I would magically reach this point when everything was easy. And I recall there was one thing that affected me, and I'll share it, right? So the constant thorn in my side for many, many years has been being fat. It's really humbling when you are a fairly capable man, and yet you can't get your body looking like it's worthy for a fitness magazine cover shoot. And it makes you feel like a failure. You're like, if I can't even control this, I can't even control my own body, I can't even control my own hand that shovels food in my mouth, man, you feel pretty worthless. And I remember this experience in about 2000 and I guess it was 2021, somewhere like that. I lost about 100 pounds. I could not see a difference in the mirror after losing 100 pounds. If you've never been fat, you might find that hard to believe because people are very different depending on, you would notice if your friend lost 100 pounds. But what happens is the way you see yourself every day. And so even when the scale says you've lost 100 pounds, you still look and see the fat. When you're a chronic dieter, you think there's going to be this time where I'm going to achieve my goal and then everything's going to be perfect. But that's not true. If you talk to people who are in great shape, they experience, from an outside perspective, you look at them and you think, man, this guy's an Adonis. But in reality, he has the same body dysmorphia that everyone has. He's looking in the mirror and he's thinking, man, my shoulders are so skinny. And you think, wow, there's something really broken here. And all of that short-term fixation, man, I'm going to be skinny for my high school graduation. I'm going to be skinny for my college graduation. I'm going to be skinny for spring break. I'm going to be skinny for my wedding. I'm going to be skinny for this. You have this idea that somehow I'm going to achieve this certain thing and then everything's going to be easy from then on, which is stupid. But most of us still think that. And we go back to life and we think, you know what? I'm going to achieve this thing. I'm going to have $10,000. I'm going to become a millionaire. I'm going to become financially independent. And then everything's going to be great and everything's going to be easy. And it never is. I've achieved most of my goals in life. I've shared the ones I haven't, but I've achieved most of my goals in life. They've usually taken me about twice as long or more than I thought it was going to take me. I never have been able to set realistic timelines. But I've achieved most of my goals. And yet, when you achieve a goal, you kind of sit there and you say, here I am. What now? And there's a thrill of victory and an emptiness of now what? I've come to realize that there is never in life a period in which you're going to achieve something and then everything's going to be simple. That is a fake and damaging and harmful philosophy. The better philosophy is to say that today I'm going to solve problems so that I can be stronger and solve bigger problems tomorrow. Today I'm going to get stronger so that tomorrow I can continue to get stronger. That strength metaphor, I think, is a good one. Let me expand it for a moment. Right? Think of how silly it is if you're a strong guy who works out a lot. Think how silly it is to think that, someday I'm going to get fat so that then life is easy and I don't have to worry about this anymore. You know that's not true. If we replaced fatness with strength, we would see how ridiculous it is. You don't say, someday I'm going to be able to squat 3 plates. And when I can squat 3 plates, then I'm going to stop squatting. That's dumb. Rather, you work towards squatting 3 plates. And then once you squat 3 plates, you say, I'm going to keep on squatting, and someday I might be able to squat 4. And you recognize that there's probably going to be a point in time at which your strength decreases, but you're never going to stop. And you don't want to stop. And if you're into that, then you look at Jack LaLanne and you say, I want to be like Jack LaLanne, right? I want to be doing jumping jacks when I'm 102. I may not be able to squat 5 plates when I'm 102, but I still want to be squatting 2. And you recognize that the goal is to keep on going. And so with money and with business and with all this, I had this broken almost 20-year philosophy, 15-year philosophy about finding the easy way. And it seemed great at the beginning because I always got better results than other people. And then you realize, no, you know what? It's actually better to be a millionaire than to just live like a millionaire. I hope someday I want to talk with Tim Ferriss about this. I haven't heard him. I bet you he's learned this lesson himself. I don't know. I haven't listened to that. But the whole idea of nobody wants to actually be a billionaire, just want to live like a millionaire faster. It's not true. It's not true. Because you know if there are cracks in your armor. You know where you're weak. You know where you've slipped in a little silicone to tell the world that you've got bulges in all the right places. But when you go home and you take out the silicone, you're still left with you looking at yourself in the mirror. And so the change in philosophy for me is that I now reject anything related to the idea that when I achieve ABC, then life is going to be easy and I'm going to coast. And I embrace something, I haven't figured out how to articulate it yet. This is the first time I'm articulating it in public. But I've embraced something more akin to, I'm going to get strong so that I'm going to do something hard, right? I'm going to do hard things so I can be stronger, so I can do more hard things. I'm going to lift heavy weights so that I can be stronger, so I can go and lift heavy weights. I'm going to tackle hard problems. I'm going to try to solve a hard problem so that I can get better, so that I can then try to solve a harder problem. And I think that's a better philosophy. It lines very much up with the idea that your future should always be bigger than your past. And I read Dan Sullivan's book years ago on that. So your future should be bigger than your past. And I've said that to so many people, that the key to successful aging is that your future must be bigger than your past. But that means that all the stuff that I used to idolize, used to think was smart stuff, now, at least for me, needs to be thrown away. So, like early retirement. I've for years abandoned the idea of early retirement. I was never really on the early retirement train. I figured out in about the first year or two of Radical Personal Finance that I was much more on the early retirement train because I didn't like my job than I was because I was actually on the idea that, hey, I just don't want to have to work. So that's nothing new. But what it means then is if I'm really going to be on the never retired train instead of the early retire train, then I've got to build something different. I've got to build something bigger, because the way that I kind of pursued Radical Personal Finance was, well, this is going to be the easy money, and I'm going to make the $10 million a year from selling cool digital courses. I'm not going to find some great magical marketing hack that's going to sell all this stuff to the world, and I'm just get back and cha-ching, cha-ching, cha-ching. It's all going to. That was the idea behind the online business. So I didn't build a real business because that's hard. I built the online business because that's easy. Now, clearly, you should hear that this is kind of a fake distinction. They go together. What I'm saying is, philosophically, I was trying to build the easy online business instead of the real business. Let me give you a practical example. I started a registered investment advisory firm in the very early days of Radical Personal Finance. I had registered a firm. I started the process with the SEC. I was going to become my own RIA. If I was my own RIA, I could do my podcast. And so it was all done, right? Fiduciary Financial Consulting, LLC. That was the company. And I pulled the registration right at the end. I wrote my ADV. I did the whole thing, and I pulled it right at the end. And I pulled it because I said, I don't want to do financial planning. I don't want to have a big team. I just want to create podcasts. Like, I want to do the easy thing. I think a fair assessment would say that was a mistake, but it was a mistake that was driven by philosophy. I could have served so many people so much better if along the way I actually had a proper RIA. And if today I had embraced that hard thing, I would have a large firm that would have a lot of clients, and we would have done really good work in a way that I can never accomplish with a bunch of online courses that are kind of half-baked. But my philosophy led me to say, I'm going to take the easy money, the $100,000 in a laptop, instead of the hard work of building something. So if you get rid of early retirement and you embrace never retirement, you have to live life very differently. I've also gotten rid of independence as a guiding philosophy. Now, am I saying that being independent is bad? No, I don't know is the answer. I don't know. What I know is for me, I achieved all my goals of being independent. No one tells me when to get up. No one tells me when to go to bed. No one tells me what to do or what not to do. I'm about as independent as I think a man can get. I don't know. Again, I don't know that it's a good thing. I guess I'm not financially independent. I can't just live on my fortune and never work again. So I haven't experienced that. But I can't see that I'm better off from being independent. And what has happened is pursuing independence kept me from building skills. So back to business, for example. I screwed everything up when I was younger and have repeatedly screwed everything up with having people work for me. I don't know why, but I just seem to be an incompetent manager. And multiple times I had different people working for me, and I'm Mr. Soft-hearted. I'm not, I'm an incompetent manager. So I'm like, oh, this is going to be great. And then what happens is they're not making me any money, and I am too much of a softy to fire them. And so I just let it go for much longer than I should. And then I wind up regretting it. So I swore off. I was like, I'm never going to have employees. I never, ever want to have employees. If I have contractors, fine, but I don't want to have employees. And then again and again, every time I think, well, here's somebody who needs something, I can work with that. And then I get angry and screw it all up again. And then that makes you feel stupid because I should be able to do this. But the point of it, what I'm saying, is that I said, well, I'll just resolve this by maintaining independence. So it's better to not have any employees, better not have any relationships. But then but that was because I wasn't willing to grow. I wasn't willing to get better. I wasn't willing to fix me. And that was dumb. Because if I had just recognized, obviously, you can't build a castle by yourself. Obviously, the idea of being the independent dude, with a laptop and a microphone, obviously that doesn't work. You don't build a big thing with that. Well, if 10 years ago I had stopped that and I had started saying, well, Joshua, why are you such a crappy boss? Why are you such a crappy manager? And how do you either fix that or how do you find someone who's not that you can work with? Then 10 years later, I'd be in a different place. But I took the easy path, independent, Mr. Independent. So I have now rejected that. I have decided I don't care about being independent. Instead, I'm going to build community. I'm going to build interdependence. I'm going to commit to people. I'm going to commit to projects. I've reset my philosophy. I have firmly decided to get rid of fast and easy, and I have embraced the 50-year plus plan. The goal when I was younger was to get rich fast and easy, right? Financial independence at 30, 7.5 years by saving 75% of my income. Never wanted to build anything big. Who's got time for that? Let me go build an internet business. Who's got time to go and put 10 years into building a foundation? Well, 10 years passes pretty quickly. I turned 40. And you reflect on the fact, wow, the years are passing. I think I've still got 50 productive years in me. Hopefully more. I'd like to have 80, but I think 50. I can do 50. If I've got 50 productive years, why am I messing about with short-term thinking? Why am I measuring things in 5 months and in 3 years and in 5-year plans? The goal in the past was always, got to get it like today, right? It's got to be done today. If I've got 50 years, I need to not be thinking about fast and easy. I need to be finding something that's really hard and doing something that's really hard. Now, I can't take that too far, but I'm telling you that I am firmly rejecting now fast and easy. If you tell me I've got a great hack, I don't want to hear it. I don't want to hack. I don't want to be a hack. I want to be real. I don't want to, put silicone in my clothes and look a certain way. I want to really be a certain way. Because as you gain prominence in something, you want to know you're not fake. It bothers me to this day that I'm not as competent a financial planner as I would like to be. Why? Well, because let me just shovel through these courses. And I've shoveled through all my courses and I hurried through the textbooks and I passed the exams. But I think if I had taken twice as much time or 3 times as much time, I could have learned 5 times as much, and then I would feel much more confident. And as it is, even though I'm sort of competent, I sometimes just make stupid mistakes and some dumb thing where I didn't get some concept straight. And that bothers me because now you're exposed, you're on the record. And so, finding the hack, passing the exam with some secret trick, right? The greatest trick to study 20 minutes for your math exam is not a deal. At some point within the next few years, I am going to learn calculus. I still have nightmares. 20-something years after college, I still have nightmares where I wake up because I've fluffed my way through my college calculus class. I got a B or a C, and I don't have a clue about calculus. I don't understand any of it, but somehow they passed me through twice. And I did not deserve either of them. I wish they had failed me in high school, and I wish they had failed me in college, because at least then I could be honest. Instead, I have this nagging thing that I don't understand anything about calculus, but technically I'm supposed to, and it haunts me. And so this is that stupid philosophy of well, I'm just going to get through. How can I just get through the class quickly? It's never gotten me anything good in life. I've experienced all the stuff that people think you're supposed to experience, and it's never gotten me anything good. So I'm picking different advisors. I'm picking a different philosophy, and going forward, I'm doing it differently. Now, if this way turns out to be bad and I've picked the wrong course and I've picked the wrong set of advisors or something, I'll tell you about that, I guess. I'll tell you about it. The point is that I've reached the heights that I could have reached with all of those previous philosophies, and I have found them all wanting, at least for me. Is this universal? I'm not claiming any of that. I'm telling you about me. But I don't like the results of what success looks like with those other philosophies. I want to do something different. I want to do something hard. I want to do something engaging, and I want to do something that matters. Will I be able to do it? I don't know. But I think what I've described to you is a superior approach. So, the definition of insanity is doing the same thing over and over and expecting different results. I've done that enough times to now I don't expect different results. So if you want different results, you've got to do something different. And over the last couple of years, about 18 months of hard work, 18 to 24 months of hard work for me, I have reset everything. And in the next podcast, I'll tell you the practical application of this hopefully new and improved philosophy. I'll tell you the practical application and what I'm doing because of it.